Well, other than Kaytron Allen, everything else about this Penn State offense is just abysmal.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are locked on to Penn State football, and as always, thank you so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day. My name is Zach Seyko, and I'm your host of the show, credentialed media member for both Penn State football and Penn State wrestling. Could James Franklin end up at Florida? What the implications of that mean for Penn State, and what is the likelihood that Franklin is employed at a new head coaching job? We're going to talk about keeping Jim Knowles. I've seen people make the argument that it actually is in Penn State's best interest to keep Knowles on staff going into next season, regardless of whoever the head coach is. I'm going to tell you why that's actually not a great idea, why that actually is a bad idea for Penn State. We got to begin with the offense, though, because outside of Kaytron Allen, the group's just not doing anything else right. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5. And if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Download the app today. Friendly reminder to let me know your thoughts down in the comment section about anything that we discussed today, beginning with Andy Kotelnicki, Ethan Grunkemeyer getting his first career start, all the parts of it. The offense is bad. Kaytron Allen was the entire reason why Penn State, sure, the offensive line looked better at times. And I think under the circumstances, I said this immediately in my post-game reaction, that, Andy Kotelnicki under the circumstances is getting better production out of this Penn State group, but he's still making mistakes that he shouldn't be making, decisions that he shouldn't be making. You have to know the situation. And what I disagree with wholeheartedly about Andy Kotelnicki and his game plan for Penn State is that he's treating Ethan Grunkemeyer like he's Drew Allar. You're treating this offensive line like it's the exact same offensive line from a season ago, and it should be, but it's not. Okay, they're just not performing like it. You would think that what they were able to do against Notre Dame, SMU, and Boise State and Oregon in those 4 games consecutively, that it would have translated all this year, and it didn't. And the wide receivers, Trevor Pena, Kyron Hudson, Devontae Ross, I was told in the offseason, before the season started, this group, this is exactly what Penn State needs to help balance out the passing attack. Well, when you combine all of these things together, I'm really surprised it wasn't worse. I was expecting Penn State's offensive game plan to be a lot worse because you had a first-time starting quarterback. You have an offensive line that has been anything but above average sometimes. And then the wide receivers, they don't get open. They don't create separation. So why is Grunkemeyer hesitant? Why is he not throwing the football? Why is he not on the same page with his wide receivers? Well, when his first read's not there, I'm not surprised that the first-time starting quarterback is going to be a little hesitant, choppy in the pocket. He's got happy feet in the pocket and then doesn't make the best decision. He had 2 interceptions. I don't necessarily put that on him. Luke Reynolds, the ball bounces off of his face mask. An Iowa defensive back makes a phenomenal SportsCenter top 10 play, even though that's essentially an arm punt. But it goes back to Andy Kotelnicki putting Grunkemeyer in a situation where he's treating him like Drew Allar. Okay. As much as I would like to believe in Ethan Grunkemeyer and think that he is going to be a good quarterback in college football down the road, what is he right now? Grunkemeyer is not a fourth year veteran quarterback and a third-year starter, but he's running all of the same things that Drew Allar has the capability to do. That's not the way to do it, especially when you go on the road against a top 10 defense at Kinnick. Again, I'm surprised that it wasn't worse. And it's because Kaytron Allen was able to bail them out of a lot of situations. And the run blocking looked better. Andy Kotelnicki was calling plays that was setting other explosive plays up. When he would call a bad play or what looked to be a bad play, it would help set up something for later. And then Kaytron Allen basically did it all himself from there. But pass blocking, again, wide receivers just not creating separation or catching the football. Trevor Pena catches a ball in the end zone, And Penn State honestly wins that game. And he was one of the top wide receivers in the transfer portal and drops the game-winning touchdown reception. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't clean. But I feel like somebody who's been playing a lot of college football and is a former all-conference receiver should be able to make that play. Kotelnicki also has to understand the circumstances as a veteran head coach. Look, I get your strong suit. What you're comfortable with is running a 2-quarterback system. But you were basically down to 2 quarterbacks. So when one gets hurt, that's going to be an issue. And you put Jackson Smolik in that situation to get hurt. I'm not saying that Andy Kotelnicki intentionally hurt the other quarterback here, but you're already down Drew Aller. I understand if you're running some more 2-quarterback plays when you have the full depth chart, but you're already down your starting quarterback from 6 days ago. You lost your starter for the rest of the season, not even a week later, and you're just saying, all right, we're throwing the entire quarterback depth chart out the window potentially. And you did. Iowa played physical for a full 4 quarters. They were really bringing the physicality to Penn State. The type of energy that team had from start to finish was honestly stood out to me a ton, that they did not let up. They took that game extremely personally. And when you're down a quarterback already, it's probably not the right move to put Jackson Smolik, especially when he's not a true running quarterback. He is not a true mobile quarterback. Him and Ethan Grunkemeyer are actually very similar, which is why they had a quarterback battle to begin with. Let me also throw my 2 cents on Grunkemeyer. For the people that said, hey, I thought he played well. I thought he had a good game under the circumstances. Okay, objectively speaking, he had a bad game. He had a very bad game. 15 to 28, didn't even throw 100 yards, had the 2 interceptions that, again, I won't necessarily put on him. He had some plays where he was able to create with his legs, keep drives alive. But there was only, again, he was missing reads. He was missing reads pretty routinely, and that's understandable for a second-year quarterback in his first start against a top 10 defense. Phil Parker was going to eat up this situation all the way. He was going to take advantage of this all the way through. And again, I'm surprised Penn State offensively had as much success as it did. But if you're Kotelnicki, why are you giving the same kind of playbook to Grunk when Grunk only has 1 start compared to Drew's, 30? That is coaching malpractice. You need to shrink the playbook, not keep it the same or even expand it. You have to simplify it. If that's the belief in Grunk, okay, so be it. But you were calling plays, you were scheming plays around him, and then giving him the same capabilities that Drew Aller made. It doesn't make any sense. It's inconsistent. So when you look at that final drive, Andy Kotelnicki isn't calling bad plays, but the quarterback running them is not the guy who's been running them successfully. On that 4th down and 1 call where Terry Smith rolls the dice, and I don't blame the decision, but Kotelnicki calls a play that Drew Aller and Tyler Warren execute to perfection against USC. Different circumstances when it's Luke Reynolds and Ethan Grunkemeyer. And then I see people saying, why are we running the football with Nicholas Singleton on 3rd down and 5? Because it's an RPO. Kotelnicki is not running a halfback draw to Singleton, but it is part of the play. It's an option. In that situation, Grunk should have read the play and tossed it to a wide open Devontae Ross. That's an easy 1st down. The drive is extended. Well, makes the bad read, doesn't see the defender that breaks in on Singleton. He's supposed to read the edge defender and immediately toss it to the side to Ross. Maybe Ross even gets 20 yards on that play. He at least gets a 1st down if it's a completed pass. But I imagine that Grunk could complete that. And then on the 4th down play, it's a play action rollout to the left. Okay, Kotelnicki, you're calling a play for him to roll out to his non-dominant side. That's one. You're having him roll away from his throwing side. So I don't agree with that there. But the play was materializing. He had Ross running across the formation. There was separation, and he was creating natural picks by the other wide receivers. All Grunk had to do is roll to the left and just hit Ross again, and it's another 1st down. Well, Grunk panics, rolls back to the other side and tries to play hero ball, and it doesn't work. Know the situation. That's why Penn State lost this game. Andy Kotelnicki was calling a better game overall. I thought the offense it seemed collectively more successful compared to the other games that they played, the other 6. I know they scored a lot against UCLA, but it's still, under the circumstances, you have to know who you're working with, and you can't keep the same playbook. Kotelnicki should have dialed it back as opposed to moving forward and expanding it in some regards. So other than Katron, this offense just isn't it. And it's going to be a struggle between Ohio State and Indiana. Back-to-back number 1 teams, that number 1 and number 2 team, back-to-back weeks. That's going to be rough for a group that just isn't that good overall. All right, Jim Knowles. Should Penn State actually keep Jim Knowles going into next season? They made a hefty investment into him. Why it's probably best for Penn State to move on. I'll explain why coming up next year on Locked On Nittany Lions. And this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel has an offer that you do not want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. Pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. FanDuel gives you so many ways to play. You can build parlays, try player props, and even follow live lines during the games. It makes watching football even more exciting when you've got a little something riding on the action. Whether you're a casual fan or you love diving into the stats, FanDuel makes the game day experience so much better. And remember, new customers, when you bet $5 with your first bet, you'll get $300 in bonus bets if that first bet wins. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. And this episode is brought to you by Quo. One of the tools that helps make a huge difference for business owners is Quo, formerly Open Phone. It's the same great business phone system you've heard me talk about before, just with a new name. And here's why it matters. Every missed call is money left on the table. When every customer conversation counts, you need a phone system that keeps you connected 24/7. Quo is the #1 business phone system that streamlines customer communications. It works right through an app on your phone or computer, so no more carrying 2 phones or relying on a landline. Their built-in AI agent is a game changer. It can answer after-hours calls, capture leads, and keep business moving even when you're off the clock. And whether you're a solo operator juggling everything or part of a larger team, Quo makes it easy to stay responsive and professional. See why over 90,000 businesses trust Quo, formerly Open Phone. Get started for free and get 20% off your first 6 months at quo.com/lockedoncollege. That's QUO.com/lockedoncollege. And if you've got an existing number with another service, Quo will port them over at no extra charge. Quo, no missed calls, no missed customers. Should Penn State keep Jim Knowles? Well, I'm here to tell you why that's actually a bad idea if you're Penn State, unless they go with this one specific coaching hire. So Jim Knowles, the Jim Knowles experience has not been a good one for Penn State. Ohio State people, fans or analysts, people that cover the team, were not kidding when they said, so hindsight's 2020. Definitely should have listened to them since they saw it. I thought that was just kind of a way to jab Penn State and cope with the fact that, hey, Penn State just took your defensive coordinator to try to level the playing field. It did not matter. And again, hindsight's 2020, where this is the kind of mistakes that cost James Franklin his job. When Penn State was in win now mode, win a national title. This wasn't a rebuild year. This was a reloading type of year. At least it was supposed to be. That was the setup. And you go and hire a defensive coordinator where the understanding is, right, if people that follow the team, cover the team, understand that Jim Knowles' defense is going to take multiple years to learn, I got to imagine that James Franklin and everybody else knew that too, right? Guess not. Maybe not. But I've seen people try to argue that, hey, well, you did get a top defensive coordinator. You don't want to just part ways with him immediately. Find a way to incorporate him on the next staff and have him be the defensive coordinator. Surely that's a good idea. In theory, it is. But it's not when you factor in what I just told you. Okay, but it's also, let me provide some context here. I'm not expecting Penn State to retain more than half of its roster. It really depends what direction Penn State goes in with its head coach. So this could mean that's what I'm trying to point out here. If Jim Knowles were to stay on staff, so that would mean that the head coach would have to be okay with getting Jim Knowles as his defensive coordinator. And the way that fans and the way that Pat Kraft declares a national title, the expectations are very high. Do you want to come in and be Penn State's next head coach with the mentality that you are in win now? Again, it's not a rebuild situation, it's a reloading situation. So anything short of a college football playoff appearance honestly doesn't look that great right out of the gate. So keeping Knowles next season is probably not in the best interest of the next head coach unless they're trying to do a full comprehensive rebuild and you're compatible with Jim Knowles. Hey, maybe you find a head coach that would actually like to run Jim Knowles' defense, run a 4-2-5 and keep the system going. Okay, who would that be? Honestly, I'm not entirely sure what head coach would ultimately fit well with Jim Knowles aside from Terry Smith, because you've already started the process. That is the situation where you keep Jim Knowles. If Terry Smith ends up being promoted from interim head coach to head coach, which is becoming a little less likely, you lose that game against Iowa, you're probably not going to win against Ohio State and Indiana. But if you do, the conversation massively changes. I will wait to see the results of what happens. I'm not expecting Penn State to win those games, but if they do, then the conversation is going to be a lot different. And Terry Smith kind of justifies removing that interim label and being the head coach, because on the fly to do that, to rally the team, to beat the number 1 and number 2 teams, you very well could. If Terry Smith were to do that, to beat the number 1 team, it would be the number 1 team back-to-back weeks. Because if you somehow upset Ohio State and Columbus, I know what the odds are. I'm still going to speak in hypotheticals and set up the scenario. If Terry Smith were to upset the number 1 team in Ohio State one week and then turn around the following week and upset Indiana, that would be back-to-back upsets of a number 1 team. You would have to remove the interim label at that point. You don't even need to see what the rest of the season holds. And if that's the case, I can justify Terry Smith being interested in working with and keeping Jim Knowles, because Penn State did make that investment. I get it. They're willing to spend, and I'm going to talk about this more in the next segment with James Franklin. How Penn State already has shown that they're not afraid to spend the money to get rid of a coach. So why not just get rid of Jim Knowles as it is? But Knowles is still a proven defensive coordinator. He's still one of the best in the business. Why let him go after one season just because there's been a lot of speed bumps along the way? But again, if it's a different head coach, if it's a new head coach that doesn't want to run this system, I totally understand wanting to go in a different direction as the head coach, and then you restart that clock. You restart the clock of Jim Knowles' defense, because then you have all these different players. You have players that have worked in the system but haven't worked in the system, and you basically start that time frame over. So where Jim Knowles needs 2 to 3 years to fix the defense, that starts all the way over when Penn State seems like it's in win now, and win now fast. Could James Franklin be hired by Florida? The Gators finally fire Billy Napier. James Franklin to Florida makes a lot of sense, and that impacts Penn State. We're going to talk about that more coming up next here on Locked On Nittany Lions. And this episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Let's be honest, most of us can't even name all of our financial accounts, let alone what they're worth. Between 401ks, savings, and investments, it's easy to lose track, and that can mean leaving money on the table. That's why you got to start using Monarch. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or on your phone. Can help you organize your accounts, track your spending, and get a better handle on your investments without ever having to touch a spreadsheet. You can review everything with a partner, see shared goals, and make better financial decisions together. Monarch's visual dashboards and smart tools make it so much easier to understand where your money's going and how to make it work harder for you. Don't let this financial opportunity slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarch.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarch.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. James Franklin, you are the next head coach of the Florida Gators. No, I'm not going to go that far, but this does impact Penn State. I'm going to explain why and where James Franklin could potentially end up, depending on how the dominoes ultimately fall, and why Penn State actually started a coaching trend here. So Billy Napier has been fired by the Florida Gators, and a logical solution, or a name that is going to be already on lists to be the next head coach at Florida, James Franklin's already popping up. Well, Franklin's not going to be the first call that Florida makes. Florida's actually going to go, for anybody that thought Lane Kiffin was going to end up at Penn State, I didn't see it as a culture fit. I didn't think Lane Kiffin to Penn State would be ideal for either side. But I've heard for years now, Florida's just waiting to fire Billy Napier. Florida's just looking for an excuse. They want Lane Kiffin. Well, Lane Kiffin wants to reciprocate. He's going to reciprocate on that interest. So Lane Kiffin to Florida is honestly probably going to happen. Hey, good for both sides. If Lane Kiffin really wants to move on from Mississippi, Ole Miss, he doesn't like it there, so be it. Go to Florida, be the head coach. And if Florida wants to support you and give you the resources that you need, by all means, then that's a match made in heaven type of situation. So James Franklin's not going to go to Florida. I did say back in, or at least I thought back in 2021, because I wasn't doing the podcast at the time, so there's no proof of me saying this, but I hope you'll take my word for it, that I always thought Florida, USC, when there was, I don't know what that was that James Franklin's agent? Was there mutual interest in USC trying to make Franklin its next head coach before they went with Lincoln Riley? Not sure what that was at the time. Maybe it was just to get Penn State to give him a better extension, because that is ultimately what happened. But I thought if there were any schools that would poach James Franklin that were actually realistic, it would be Florida, USC, and LSU. Now, let me get to the trend part of this. What Penn State started a trend here. They showed other Power 4 programs that you don't have any excuse to not fire your head coach if it is not working out. So look at what Florida just did. They turn around after, well, the buyout and the recruiting classes, all of the other excuses or the what ifs didn't matter. Billy Napier is not winning us the games that we think we should be winning. Same thing for Penn State. Penn State said James Franklin is not winning us the games that we think we should be winning as a program. Despite all the other success, we are not reaching and achieving the goals that we have as a program. The excuse is, well, the buyout. Well, what about the recruiting? The future classes. Hey, you're doing well enough. It could be worse, right? That's the what if. It could be worse. Okay. But you set goals and you're not achieving them. What's the point of setting those goals? So Penn State took a stand and said, we can do better. And we really don't care what the buyout is, and we don't really care what the recruiting implications are. Florida had to act, and it wouldn't surprise me if other programs act on this. LSU and Brian Kelly. Auburn and Hugh Freeze. You go listen to Locked On Auburn right now. My counterparts over at Locked On Auburn, they are already naming James Franklin as one of the top candidates to replace Hugh Freeze if and when he's fired. Watch Florida State. Now, I don't think that happens. I don't think James Franklin, Florida State, I've even seen Virginia Tech as a possible destination, and Brent Pry just got fired there, former Penn State defensive coordinator. I don't think James Franklin would be inclined to take an ACC or a Big 12 job because he probably believes that that's beneath him. So you're going to see other programs. There's plenty of programs that are already making changes, making decisions, firing head coaches in the middle of the season. And it wasn't, oh, Mike Gundy and Oklahoma State started this trend. No, people were calling for Oklahoma State and Mike Gundy to part ways for a while. I'm talking on the national media landscape, people that follow and cover college football, not a group of fans or people that do not like Mike Gundy. That's not the same. That's comparing apples to oranges when you say, oh, actually, Mike Gundy and Oklahoma. No, that was everybody. There were more people saying you need to move on from Gundy than there were in the case of Penn State and James Franklin. So Penn State showed that it doesn't matter what the buyout is. It doesn't matter what the other consequences could be. If you're not meeting your goals, you got to move on. So that could force Auburn and LSU to also follow suit. And if that's the case, Well, James Franklin could be the next head coach at LSU. I thought that would have been the best fit for both sides, between USC and Florida as other possible destinations. I always thought that James Franklin and LSU would be an ideal fit for one another, and he gets to stay in the Power Two, right? The Big 12 and the ACC are its own cluster of teams, schools, and a conference in itself. It's its own tier. The SEC and the Big 10 are its own tier. That's tier one. The Big 12 and the ACC are tier two, and then it's everybody else. James Franklin wants to take that job, take a job like that, to stay in the Big 10 or the SEC. Okay, so let's say Lane Kiffin, for whatever reason, doesn't go to Florida. Maybe he ends up at LSU if LSU happens to fire Brian Kelly. What if Auburn stays with Hugh Freeze, or they go in a different direction as well, if they don't go with James Franklin? Franklin could actually stay in the Big 10 too. And if he ends up at Florida, if he ends up at LSU, or he stays in the Big 10, why this is a big deal is because Franklin is going to target former and current Penn State players. Well, I guess not necessarily former. Let me say current and future Penn State players, whether that's via the transfer portal or in recruiting. I know I already saw a projection for Keemon Spell, number one running back in the class of 2027, to go to Notre Dame, but that's not even what I'm necessarily referring to. The class of 2026, or players that could step up next season, a Chaz Coleman or a Xavier Gilliam, right? I could rattle off players left and right. Hey, maybe Tony Rojas. Okay, so think about that. Guys that you just assume are going to come back because they're starters or what have you. If James Franklin ends up, now why would he stay in the Big 10? What job is opening up? UCLA's open. I said USC would work out. Well, UCLA is in the Big 10. That could be a good spot for James Franklin, who has certainly, his reputation has taken a step backwards. UCLA, I think, would be a great fit for him, but he would be in California. Washington. Why would Washington open up? Well, Jed Fish is really interested in the Florida job as well. If Florida, for whatever reason, it doesn't work out between him and Lane Kiffin, Jed Fish might go from Washington all the way to Florida. And then Washington might make a push for James Franklin, which would make a ton of sense. I just want James Franklin to go to the media route. Go the media route. Be a studio analyst for a couple of years. But I think James Franklin would actually be smart to capitalize on the recruiting that he's done recently, the relationships that he's built. If he takes a 1 to 2 year hiatus, Penn State kind of gets off scot-free by not having to deal with Franklin going up against them in recruiting. I'm not saying that every Pennsylvania player and prospect is going to go all the way to Los Angeles or Washington if he ends up taking UCLA or the Washington job, if they were to both be open. But still, he's within the Big 10. And the way that college football has nationalized, the national landscape that we're in, you're still going to have to go up against him in recruiting, which is not ideal. It's just not ideal. It makes the next head coach's job a lot more difficult to get situated, especially when Penn State can win right now. You ace your head coaching hire, you get aggressive in the transfer portal, Penn State can definitely be right back in college football playoff contention immediately. And if James Franklin takes a job that, goes up against Penn State in recruiting, it's not ideal. That's all I'm saying. So that is what the Florida job opening up means for Penn State and potentially James Franklin. I don't know that James Franklin's going to be unemployed. He actually might have an ideal setup to go get the job that he wants rather than settling from his point of view. Hey, that's going to do it for this edition of Locked On Nittany Lions. Appreciate each and every one of you for checking out this show. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments section. If you are new to the channel, subscribe to the YouTube channel and wherever you get your podcasts, because we do this daily, talking about your favorite Penn State sports teams, everything: football, wrestling, recruiting, basketball, hockey, you name it, all right here on Locked On Nittany Lions.